Hello, I'm Ben Cahlamer, film critic with the movie Revue. We are here today to talk about All Man. All Man, the international mail story. Before we begin our interview, we'd like to thank Paradise Valley Community College and the Maricopa Community College District for supporting our festival. Also, our kind thanks to Phoenix Pride and Ion AZ Magazine for helping us celebrate the beauty and diversity of LGBTQ plus filmmaking. And I can't think of a more diverse film that audiences will see at this year's Desperado than All Man, the international mail story. And I confess, I remember as a young boy seeing the cover of the magazine, probably looking at some of the wares in it and being fascinated, but not fully understanding myself as a young individual. But I have to say, if my memory serves me right, you made an impression on this critic. So thank you very much. Would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Great. Hi there, thanks for having me. I'm Jesse Findley Reed, the co-director and producer of All Man, the international mail story.
Thank you for that, Jesse. I want to first congratulate you on the documentary. As we were talking before we went on mic, we were discussing the need for not just the community, but I think the world as a whole, to be reminded of what it was like, the struggles and the adversity that International Mail faced as it was coming into its own. And the recognition that fantastic clothing and limitations in terms of what men think that they can wear and get away with are really only in their minds. And you opened your arms up, and as a family was a really important theme that runs through the documentary. Can you expand more upon that idea and how it relates, how the documentary relates to the world at large today?
Yeah, sure. That's a big question, so I might need some guidance as I answer. But I think that, yeah, the film is set in a time where there's limited representation in the world. Like, it's the analog world still. You have what's on TV, what's in the movie theater, and what's in the newspaper and magazines. And that's how those of us who are Gen Xers and older knew of the world. It's hard to impress enough that, I say I want to hear this aha song, and I just type it into my browser, and I'm suddenly on YouTube watching a video that we might have sat up waiting hours on MTV to watch, for instance. And so not having things at your fingertips in the analog world, things really sort of stand out and leave an impression. And I think that the International Mail catalog and the sort of genius of Jean Burkhardt, who was the creator, and Gloria Tomita, who was the right hand, two people you'll get to meet when you see the film, they really sought to sort of carve out a space where men could buy and have access to sort of boundary pushing fashion, like a peach colored suit, like a mesh tank top. These things weren't readily available in your local Sears, so to speak. And that was like a big mission of theirs. They were really ahead of the curve with sort of creating something that made it safe for all kinds of consumers to buy. And I think that was the genius of it. Men could look at this catalog, and it didn't say gay anywhere, even though gay men of a certain generation were ascribing all these meanings to these images. But that's what made it a success, and I don't want to give away everything that's in the film, but I think audiences are going to be really surprised to learn who their biggest customers were.
I'm sorry, that factoid really surprised me.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that it's cool to be surprised. I mean, should I give it away or should I not?
It's up to you.
Yeah, I'll let people find that out through watching the film, because I think it's a really interesting reveal. But I think that it just goes to show you, how in this world of limited representation, how sort of outrageous in some ways this was, and why it got this sort of tagline, or was often written off as a quote unquote gay catalog. It's something we explore a lot in the film, how this sort of family of outsiders, these people that came together to make really, it's an American success story. This catalog, they had this vision to make this catalog, and what they were up against, and the sort of pushback of it always being labeled something which it didn't seek to be. And I think that label is a really complex topic that the film sort of explores efficiently, but one that's rich terrain to look further at and more critically at, which is, what is masculine? What is masculine self-expression in our culture? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a man that wears boundary-pushing clothes? All of these things come up, and I think we're in the present, to tie this to the present, I think we're in a really important moment as a culture where we're taking these things apart, collectively. And I think it's important that this happens collectively. And we see this through the Black Lives Matter movement. We see this through the Me Too movement. There's this pendulum shift and a criticality in looking at masculinity, white cis male masculinity, and what that really means. And I think it's a complex topic. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was please redirect me if I know you wanted me to catch it today, so I did the best I could.
No, you did perfectly fine. Actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because in today's interconnected, have to have it now, everything is instantly at your fingertips type society, we don't have patience. And it's interesting that we've run out of patience with certain things. Yeah, you mentioned the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, the inclusion initiative, as people seek to better relate and understand their gender fluidity. That's not something that I experienced as a kid, and it's catching even me off guard. And I'm one of the most I'm a highly accepting individual. I don't make any limitations or sidetracks. And to think about the fact that we had a magazine or a catalog way back when, before those were societal normative phrases, impresses me, because in a way, you were trailblazers, not just in men's fashion, but in an ideology. And I think society today owes a great deal of thanks to what the International Male team did and what your team did in making this documentary.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's so interesting because the team at International Male, I think it's cool because they were such a family, and it was such a great privilege of all of ours on the filmmaking team to get to know these people. I mean, they still have a Facebook group page. They have reunions together. I mean, everyone says it was like the best job they ever had. And this is like models to stylists to all sorts of people. And I think in making something special that they put out in the world, it sort of bonded them all together in a really cool way. And they always say that, like, we were just trying to sell clothes. Like, we were just trying to put things in people's mailboxes. You know, we were trying to run a business. But what was imbued in that business is like perhaps a queer sensibility, perhaps a female, whatever that means, a female perspective in sort of styling these clothes and sort of telling the story. And this was like the genius of the team, is that, you know, a lot of photography one would find in a catalog of that era is, you know, shot against a backdrop, you know, maybe with like a pedestal with a vase on it, or maybe like arrangement of furniture, but very studio photography. And they really wanted to tell this story, like, here's this guy and he's getting on a plane and he's going to Barbados, or he's going to Côte d'Azur, or he's traveling the globe, he's Indiana Jones, he's Fabio, he's like all of these things, all of these sort of archetypes of masculinity, yet at the same time he's playing, or that these characters are playing with what is socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think what's really fascinating about the story is that in the early days, when it was sort of Jean's baby, so to speak, you know, it was this sort of unconscious, intuitive way that is very different now. Like, we couldn't be that naive in some ways, like of just having a vision and it not checking it against other references. But, you know, and sure, there were some other references like Playgirl and Burt Reynolds on a bearskin rug. But, you know, it was this thing where it was like, I have this idea. He's like, I'm going to put these really hot men, these sort of archetypes of masculinity in these boundary pushing clothes. And it wasn't conscious, but that's the meaning that's inferred. So like, you can get away with a peach scoop neck tank top as long as you have a certain body. And this is also a sort of critique of international male, is that we see this pervasive hyper-masculinity in queer culture and mainstream culture, where the 6-pack's been replaced by the 12-pack. And, you know, of like, what that body obviously carries a lot of privilege with it, especially if you look at like a white body next to a black body. And I think, again, we as a culture are playing with and taking that apart. And I love that about like things like TikTok now, because you just see such a range of representation. And that was, again, not the international male time, it was the analog world. Like, it has changed so much. And I think in some ways this catalog was, you know, blazed a trail, so to speak. It blazed a trail for men and those who enjoyed buying clothes for men to find other ways to express themselves.
It also, you know, from the outside in, looking both at your documentary and remembering looking at Abercrombie and Fitch magazines when I was a teenager, you know, just not necessarily envisioning myself as that model, but envisioning myself in that photo, being able to wear those clothes and look good. And there's something that's empowering and inspiring about what it accomplished without being overtly direct. And that's one of the things that I admired most about the documentary, is that you cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time and a lot of history. I don't want to say that that caught me off guard as much as it it excited me because when you think about what international mail was, it was not of its time, it's timeless. Your documentary is timeless, but within it, you captured moments of timelessness, both happy and sad. Um, you know, it's all of the subjects that you interviewed were vivacious, bubbly, personable. They seemed to me to be um, very at ease with the type of work that they did because they enjoyed it and they were committed to it. And um, I keep bringing up the subject of family, but it really felt like they were a family and that they could trust one another.
Well, and I mean, this goes back, I mean, to what we were talking about the landscape of the world. And for me, as a person, as a creative person, I think it's the great privilege we have as like documentary filmmakers taking a subject like international mail and really thinking about it. Through working with Brian, he had the idea of like, let's create a timeline where we have what's going on in pop culture, what's going on in the news, what's going on in the queer culture. And we laid out this like whole timeline, and it was so interesting how international mail fit into this. It really sort of justified it becoming a feature. Not that we fit all this stuff in to make a feature, it's that this piece of cultural production is operating in conjunction with all of these other things happening socially, politically, in the queer movement. And it was important, I think, and it gives a lot of strength to the exploration we do in the story of international mail, because it was operating in some ways, it was inspired in some ways, others took inspiration from it in some ways. And that's really the wonderful privilege we have about looking back on anything. We can sort of elevate voices, we can contextualize voices, and hopefully, like the reason why I am excited to continue this type of work is to better understand ourselves as a culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard when you're living in culture to realize the ramifications of HIV/AIDS on a personal level, on a cultural level, like on a on a broad like societal level. And this story fits in with that.
Yeah.
It's not every story about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but it's one view. And I think like through Peter's input and just help in putting this film together, because we were like, oh my gosh, we have so much, we have so many stories, and they're all these great stories, and they're these earnest, personable people who care so much and like want success for us too as filmmakers. And Peter, we always knew that like the family of outsiders, we call them the band of outsiders internally, we always wanted the story to be driven in a big way, or that's what we realized in the editing process. We wanted the story to be driven by this family. And because I think personal stories are a way that people can attach themselves to things. You know, I haven't, you know, I think here we are, you know, our main subject in some ways is this catalog, but it's also like Jean and Gloria and all these people. And I think when you have an inanimate object like a catalog, these people can be stand-ins to articulate what this catalog means. And it's like from Carson Kressley's perspective, from Jean's perspective, and from all those perspectives out there of like just people seeing the film and what they would add to it. I mean, there are many stories to tell.
How long did it take you to gather all of the footage? How much time did you spend on actual production?
The number is 6 years.
Wow.
6 years, meaning, yeah, it took a really long time. And like, I mean, it's both Brian and my first feature. And it, you know, when we say 6 years, it wasn't like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday for 6 years, of course. It was like, you know, shoot, 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 research, 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 you know, fit it into the schedule. And I think with a lot of projects like this, which are passion projects that don't necessarily have funding in the beginning, you sort of have to take a risk and sort of do it when you can. And I want to make no illusions out there. I feel like often artists and filmmakers are like, oh, I had this idea and I put it together and it all came together. It was like, yeah, it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make this happen. And I'm so glad we did. Like, I'm so glad this collaboration happened between all these people, and through our team of like Taylor and Peter and Brian. You know, we all brought something to really make this as rich of a story as it is. And I feel really proud of that as a team.